And in case of India, the situation is in many ways similar to China, but in many ways very different from China. So I think it can draw a lot of similarities, but also pose a number of challenges in terms of the differences. So I think that's what I'm trying to capture in this presentation as well a bit. So just to give a very brief overview, we are a large emerging economy slated to grow at a high growth rate. China's already done that, but India is now looking at growing at a double-digit rate, at least for the next decade or so. All of the projections do indicate that India is slated to grow rapidly, and also the government has the priority to pull people out of the poverty trap. So that is the intent and the aspiration of the government. A large section of population still lives in abject poverty and lacks access to services. In fact, we very recently come out with the latest census report, which shows some very startling trends about the people below poverty line, and those numbers have actually increased. So the country is even more in terms of a challenge, facing the situation of how to provide enough infrastructure to the people and enough energy access to the people, while at the same time trying to improve the emission intensities of how it develops. The other aspect, which is again recently changed in terms of the aspirations, is about the revival of the industrial sector. So while we've had more of a tilt towards services growing, now there is a diktat saying that the Make in India should be encouraged, and that is again to get a strong manufacturing base. But like we know, and as China would have already seen it, when you're growing towards a manufacturing base, you're likely to have a higher emissions intensity. So again, at one point we are trying to produce INDCs which show our capability in terms of what we can do to reduce emissions intensity, but at the same time we want to have a very strong infrastructure base and a large manufacturing base. So the two are clearly requiring technology to play a very key role in terms of how we can bring in very large transformative changes in a very much accelerated manner, both in terms of our sustainable development and climate change kind of needs. So again, the development issues are closely linked to climate change, and we need to be aware of it and also address it at the same time. In terms of vulnerability also, the country has a high vulnerability, so we are interested in also looking at what to do in terms of infrastructure development, etc., to increase the capability to adapt and to make the agriculture sector, the social sectors less vulnerable to whatever implications there will be of climate needs. I'll just skip these, but there are a variety of issues, including more and more the challenge of water scarcity and stress, which is now starting to stare us in the face. So along with the energy sector challenge, a lot of areas in the country are already water stressed as well. So the red areas that you see here face high water stress, and the dots out there are the existing and planned thermal power plants. And as we know, thermal power generation is among the larger of the water consumers compared to the other power generation technologies. So basically the map is just there to show that there are considerations that the government and planners need to take, which are not only because of climate change, but also because of the pressures we will face from other resources as well. So similarity in terms of China, again, we have a lot of co-benefit needs which tie in very closely with what is required for addressing climate change and mitigation, whether it is on the use of other resources, whether it is about air pollution in terms of the local air quality in the cities and so on. We face the same challenges as well, and therefore there is a need to move away towards low carbon options and cleaner fuels. Of course, the key consideration is that we do still need to develop, and we do not want to compromise on the development aspirations, but that just makes the challenge even doubly difficult. So we've done a bit of scenario-based analysis, and if you look at a reference kind of scenario, it looks like a horrible scenario which takes our primary energy needs up many times, continues to remain largely dependent on fossil fuels, and all of this is clearly a no-go area for the country, and the country realizes that whether it's energy security concerns, air pollution related concerns, etc., this needs to be addressed, and there needs to be a change. So accordingly, we have designed scenarios to look at how we can move away from this unambitious kind of scenario towards a scenario which not only ties in better towards energy security for the country, but also addresses these other co-benefits such as deteriorating air quality, the water concerns, and so on. A couple of scenarios were designed to look at this, and this is the kind of flexibility that we see in terms of what can be achieved by 2031. So if you look at the last 3 bars out there, there are significant scopes for reducing the energy in terms of energy efficiency kind of improvements, in terms of moving away from coal and oil-based energy towards a greater diversity, and shift towards renewable-based energy, nuclear energy, and so on. So this is where the country's policies are also starting to get directed, and some of them are pretty much in the correct direction. But again, the point that I really want to make is that while the direction is correct, the kind of scale that we need to really make the transitions and start moving towards an energy or emissions intensity which is in line with what climate science tells us, or some of the scenarios which are closer towards a 2 degrees C kind of temperature limit can go. It's important to look at larger transformations, and that is where I think regional cooperation and technology costs coming down quicker than what we expect is extremely essential. So I won't go into details of the sectors, but again, from the analysis that we've done, there is significant scope for renewable energy power in India, and this is something again which has been estimated and analyzed, and the government has recently stepped up its ambition from an already ambitious 20 gigawatts of solar energy by 2020 to more than 100 gigawatts now. So this is a very ambitious program. Whether the country can actually achieve it, what would happen if those kind of if the costs of solar remain what they are today, because they are still several magnitude times more costlier than the current coal-based power generation. So what kind of implication would that have on the economy? These are all the kinds of challenges which the country faces, even though the aspiration may be to move towards a much higher renewable energy mix. In case of industry again, and I'll come to policies straight away. And just to also mention the transport sector, this is again a place where the mobility need in the country is of course high and growing. The sector is such that the growth rate has continued to be much higher than what the energy efficiency has been able to offset. So while there have been continuous improvements in the vehicle technologies, while there have been improvements in the kind of rail locomotive efficiencies, in operational efficiencies and so on, just the growth of the sector is so rapid that if the benefits do not get noticed. Now with the need to again move towards higher rail-based transport, which is more efficient than road-based transport, especially for freight, we would need dedicated freight corridors, we would need high-speed rails, etc. to initiate the shift towards railways. But that again calls for a lot of infrastructure to be developed, and again something which is energy intensive. So in all the calculations that we've been doing in our scenarios, while we try to push the technologies towards the more efficient ones, the infrastructure and other things that get entailed with it nearly almost always offset the current efficiency gains. So I think that is something which again is a similarity to China, but a decade ago, because we noticed in the presentation that the energy elasticity during the time that the manufacturing sector really saw the growth was high at around 1. But that I think is going to be similar also in case of India. Now the question really that I would like to pose is that how do we sort of learn from others, how do we make use of leapfrogging towards technologies and options such that we could reduce that energy elasticity sooner than what happened in China and what could possibly happen in India, and what kind of mechanisms there are available to make those kind of leapfrogs. Now if we just look at the energy intensity in these 3 scenarios, in all of them they do, and these are very ambitious scenarios that we have designed, which we would aspire to work towards. And in these cases the emissions intensity could come down. But the challenge really is that because the costs are high, because there's little learning so far within the country, it is unlikely that in reality we would be able to achieve these kind of scenarios, and there would be limitations, and probably at best we could remain only at the reference scenario. So in terms of the policies, like I had said, there are a number of policies that have in the last few years been proposed, and these are all in the correct direction. Again, in terms of the steps towards market creation towards low carbon options, India had imposed a cess on coal of about ₹50. Then it was revised to 100 rupees, and again the proposal is to double that. So the government is trying to, on the one hand, create disincentives towards the use of coal, and also the thinking is to use this cess towards creating a pool of money which can be used to fund clean technologies or renewables. So then in a projectized mode, the government has also established the National Clean Energy Fund, the NCEF, to channelize this funding for clean energy projects, and an interministerial group has been set up to approve projects and schemes that would get the finance through this fund. So again, some money was collected. Initially we saw that while the cess was implemented, not too much disbursement was happening, but now the projectization mode has started and there is some movement towards that. However, this needs to be scaled up quite a bit. Also in terms of the PAT scheme, which is the Perform, Achieve and Trade scheme of industries, the intent is to create a kind of a trading mechanism between efficiency certificates, and different designated consumers or units within industries were tasked with improving their energy efficiency to a certain level. And if they overachieved what they were set out to achieve, they could trade the certificates with others who failed to achieve the desired level. So again, this is working towards the principle of reducing pollution. And the first phase has now sort of gotten over, but again, this is being extended to cover other industries and other designated consumers to also improve the efficiency in other sectors. The third kind of policies have been, of course, the thrust towards renewables, and as I had mentioned, there are enhanced targets for renewables from 20 gigawatt to over 100 gigawatt. There's a very strong thrust which is being provided to solar rooftop program and also to wind-based power generation. Again, the carbon tax exists in a sense on fossil fuels now. So India had earlier always been into the subsidy kind of mechanism, but slowly and gradually there is more and more of a increased tax on fossil fuels, including petrol and diesel, to encourage the shift towards cleaner fuels. So I think all of these, from the government's point of view, are in the correct direction and in line with what we have designed as our ambitious scenarios towards which the country should move. However, there is a big need for regional cooperation in Asia, because There is a lot of learning which exists in many of the countries surrounding us. Sometimes there are similarities in factor endowments, there's cheap labor, and China has been very successful in stepping up its manufacturing, whether it's of solar technologies, whether it's of CFLs, LEDs, and probably India can learn how to step up its own manufacturing base as well, and sort of collaborate with China as well as other countries. Again, sometimes there are similarities in the levels of development, business environment, infrastructure, support, etc. And again, they can be learning on all of this as to what works and what doesn't work, etc. So I think there is a big need for regional cooperation. However, there are also several barriers to regional energy trade and cooperation, and these definitely need to be thought about and addressed as we go along. There are several success stories which I think India has had in the past, but again, they have been one-off kind of examples. There's been energy cooperation and trade with Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, etc. But they have always been short-lived, and there is a lot of potential for further regional cooperation with our neighboring countries, but this again needs to be enhanced. So there are many kind of issues, and again, in terms of technology-related regional cooperation, I feel there could be cooperation towards reducing IPR-induced costs, enabling economies of scale, building absorptive capacity. So there are a number of reasons why we need to push that, but there are also challenges in terms of, for example, looking at climate-smart energy technologies. And if we look at the status, on one hand, for a country like India, you want to push your own manufacturing industry and propose the Make in India kind of story, but at the same time, maybe you should not be protecting your own nascent industry, but trying to look at it regionally and trying to get benefits. So just to bring in the argument, I put in these slides, I won't go into detail, but we do get a lot of technologies from outside. Whether we should continue to do that from within the region, or whether we should try and look inwards and support our domestic market remains a question. So what should we do with regard to tariffs on these low carbon goods, etc., and whether reduction of tariffs is a good thing or should be continued, etc., is an issue which I've sort of discussed in the paper as of now. Also, there need to be international cooperation on clean technologies in many kinds of ways, and this needs to be thought about. Various elements need to come into the framework. I haven't elaborated this in the paper yet, but intend to do so, and need to talk about the financial cooperation as well as to what can happen along with the capacity building needs of the region and how we can collaborate on that as well. Thank you. I think that just